Hello, good evening. You are welcome to our lecture. Today's lecture on chordates will be on the internal anatomy and physiology of Aves, the birds. Earlier, we had discussed about the introductory part of the class Aves, or the birds, and we had described them as feathered, winged, bipedal, endothermic vertebrates. And we also looked at their internal anatomy. Then today we are going to look at their internal anatomy. The internal anatomy we want to look at first is their skeletal system. The skeletal system of birds is adapted for flight. Birds are usually arboreal. Birds usually need to fly from one place to another, and as such, they have a lightweight skeleton. And most of the bones of flying birds are thin and hollow. Some have internal struts or trusses or cross walls that make them very strong. The bones have air spaces that are called pneumatic cavities. And those pneumatic cavities are connected to the respiratory system, in which air is introduced into the bones to make the bones lighter and to enable the bird to be buoyant for flight. Birds differ from mammals in being able to move the upper mandible in their skeletal system rather than the lower mandible relative to the cranium. That is to say that when the mouth is opened, both the lower and the upper jaws can move in most birds, though there are exceptions. The spine has cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and caudal regions with a number of cervical, that's neck bones or vertebrae, highly variable and especially flexible. But movement is reduced in the anterior thoracic vertebrae and absent in the lateral vertebrae. The last few are fused with the pelvis to form the sacrum. So the point we want to take here is that the spinal cord has the cervical, the thoracic, the lumbar, and caudal region. The cervical region, which is around the neck region, then the thoracic around the chest, the lumbar, okay, and then the caudal region, the tail region. So that's one feature of the birds. Birds have a smaller total number of bones than mammals and reptiles. And one of the reasons why that happens is that many of their bones have fused together, making the skeleton more rigid. So the fusing of the bones make them to have fewer bones, and that's an adaptation for flight too. Birds also have more neck or cervical vertebrae than many other animals. Most of them have 13 to 25 of these very flexible neck vertebrae. And this helps them to groom their feathers. That's to clean their feathers, turn their heads back to do some work so to clean up their feathers. Birds are the only vertebrate animals to have a fused collarbone, or the furcula or wishbone, or a keel breastbone. So their collarbone is fused and their breastbone is also fused. Now, this is the picture of the anatomy, the skeletal system of the bird. Now you can see here is the skull, the humerus, the radius, and the ulna. And they also have the carpals, the metacarpals, and the phalanges, though the shape is quite different from that of humans, but they have similar, some of these bones. This is the cervical vertebrae, the neck bone. You can see the number of bones are very many. They have long necks compared to other vertebrates. And the sternum is the breastbone is keeled. It's keeled, it's fused and flat, and that's enable it to attach muscles for flight. Now I want to look at the excretory system of birds. The excretory system of a bird is very water efficient, which means that the bird does not need to drink water very often. It is very water efficient. It helps to conserve a lot of water, and that is an adaptation for flight. Like the reptiles, birds are primarily uricotelic. That is, their kidneys extract nitrogenous waste from their bloodstream and excrete it as uric acid instead of urea. So the birds excrete uric acid instead of urea or ammonia via the ureters into the intestine. So the excretory system of the birds is directly connected to the intestines. So the birds actually do not have urinary bladder. Okay, their excretory system is connected to their digestive system. Paired complex kidneys work to filter out nitrogen waste or uric acid from the blood. So they have a pair of kidneys that enable them to carry out their excretory functions. The kidneys lies in depressions that are located on the underside of the pelvis. The malpighian tubules, which are active tubules of the kidney, are very small in comparison with those of mammals. They range in size from 90 to 400 per cubic millimeters. So they are actually, the malpighian tubules are usually very small. More than 60% of the waste nitrogen is excreted as uric acid or its salts. There is some reabsorption of water from the urine in the cloaca with uric acid remaining. So when the nitrogenous wastes are introduced into the intestines, when it gets to the cloaca, the area before the anus, reabsorption takes place instead of in the lobe of Henle. The mammalian kidney or the kidney of the kidney of the mammals have a malpighian and the loop of Henle where reabsorption takes place. But in birds, since they do not have salt, the reabsorption actually takes place in the cloaca. Since there is no urinary bladder to store liquid wastes, the uric acid then travels down to ureters to the cloaca instead, which is where intestinal wastes are added. The uric acid being voided with the feces. So because of the lack of urinary bladder, the wastes that have uric acid travel down the ureters to the cloaca. Okay, and they are being voided out through the uric acid is voided out through along with the feces. So that's why you don't see birds urinating. Birds do not urinate. The feces also contains uric acid. This white semi-solid mass then exits through the anus here. So this is the picture of the internal anatomy of a bird. And then it's also showing the excretory organs. Now here is the kidney, okay, the kidney, and then you have the ureter that conveys urine. Okay, the kidneys are located just dorsally, and the ureter conveys the urine to the cloaca, where it mixes with the feces and is passed out. Now, reproductive system. The cloaca is a multi-purpose opening. The cloaca, the anus of the bird, it is responsible for waste expulsion. Waste is expelled through the cloaca. Then most birds mate by joining cloaca, and females lay their eggs from the cloaca. Males of some species, such as ostriches, turkey, and many waterfowls like the ducks and the geese, possess penis. The length is thought to be related to sperm competition. There are some water birds like the ducks, they have very long penis, long coiled penis. Okay, it depends on the sperm competition. When not copulating, it is hidden within the proctodium compartment within the cloaca, just inside the vert. So the penis is hidden within the proctodium compartment within the cloaca. Okay, it's close to the veins. The testes of the male bird are internal, like those of reptiles. They do not have external testes. Males of some species, such as ostriches, turkey, and waterfowl, possess penis. Now look at this picture showing the reproductive system of birds. Here is the ovary from where eggs have been produced. The eggs are transported to around the cloaca where they are being voided out or they are being laid. Sperm is also introduced through the cloaca. They do not have vagina. The sperm travels through the vagina into the oviduct and then down to the ovary where fertilization of the eggs take place. The fertilized eggs are then transported through the oviduct. The fertilized and matured eggs travels through the oviduct to the cloaca where they are being laid out. Now the digestive system. The digestive system of birds is unique with a crop for storage and a gizzard that contains swallowed stones for grinding food to compensate for the lack of teeth. So it has a crop which stores the food, and then it also has a gizzard that contains stones. That's why some birds, particularly the chicken, when they are eating, they will have to mix their food with stones or with sand before swallowing. It's actually a mechanism or an adaptation to enable them to grind swallowed food to compensate for their lack of teeth. The digestive system of birds typically consists of the mouth, the esophagus, the crop, the stomach, the duodenum, the intestine, and the cloaca, and other sensory organs such as the liver, the pancreas, and the caecum. Now here's the digestive system of the birds. Okay, the mouth, the bird takes in food, swallows food. There's actually no chewing because the mouth lacks teeth. So when taken in through the mouth, the food goes in through the esophagus, into the crop, and then into the gizzard, into the crop, and then into the stomach, then into the gizzard, and then through the intestines, and then it's been the digested food is being absorbed in the intestines, while undigested foods are ejected or voided out through the anus. Now I want to look at the process of digestion. What happens in the mouth? The mouth of birds has a honey-covered tongue to facilitate swallowing of food substances to the esophagus. So the tongue enables the bird to swallow food and it passes through the esophagus. There are no teeth. The lower and upper lips have been modified into sharp, strong beaks for pinching of food substances such as grains, fruits, worms, and foliage. Salivary glands are poorly developed since they rarely secrete enzymes rather than secrete mucus. for lubricating the honey-covered tongue. Only few taste buds are present in the mouth of the bird. Now, what happens in the esophagus? The esophagus is long and narrow tube that directs food and water from the mouth to the crop. The crop is actually an enlargement of the esophagus where food is temporarily stored. The crop permits the temporary storage of food prior to digestion. In some birds, such as pigeons and parrots, the epidermal cells lining the walls are broken down to produce bird milk, which is regurgitated by both parents to the mouth of their progenies. So the crop basically is for temporary storage of food. But in some birds, particularly in birds that are brooding, birds that have hatchlings, young ones, there's actually a breakdown of the epidermal cells that are lining the walls of the crop, which produce bird milk that are regurgitated. They are brought out for their young ones. They put it directly into their young ones' mouth to feed them. The stomach. The stomach of birds is typically divided into a glandular proventriculus and the muscular gizzard. Okay, so the stomach has a proventriculus and a gizzard. The proventriculus secretes gastric juice. The proventriculus of birds secretes gastric juice, and the gastric juice contains enzymes that digest proteins and dilute hydrochloric acid. Okay, the gastric juice contains enzymes that digest proteins. And the proventriculus also secretes dilute hydrochloric acid. The muscular gizzard grinds large food substances into smaller ones for easy digestion by its churning action. To aid in the grinding process, the bird swallows some coarse sand and pebbles, which are stored in the gizzard. The duodenum. Now, the duodenum, which is U-shaped, is the upper part of the small intestine. The upper part of the small intestine of the bird is called the duodenum. The liver and pancreas are connected to the duodenum by the bile and pancreatic ducts, respectively. So the liver is connected to the duodenum by the bile duct, while the pancreas is connected to the duodenum by the pancreatic ducts. Now, what do these secrete? Bile is secreted into the duodenum by 2 bile ducts, while pancreatic juice is secreted into the duodenum by 2 or 3 pancreatic ducts. The bile emulsifies fats and oils. The bile that's produced emulsifies fats and oils. The pancreatic juice contains the enzymes amylase, trypsin, and lipase, which digest carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids, respectively. The pancreatic juice that is produced and introduced into the duodenum contains amylase, and the amylase digests carbohydrates, while trypsin digests proteins, and lipase is responsible for the breakdown of lipids or fats. Now I want to look at the intestine of birds. What happens at the intestine of birds? The entrance from the duodenum to the lower intestine is muscular and ring, a ring-like structure called the pyloric sphincter. The pyloric sphincter is at the entrance to the duodenum, and it is muscular and ring-like. Now, the pyloric sphincter regulates the quantity of food that goes to the lower intestine. Digestion of all class of food is completed in the lower intestine by intestinal enzymes. The long and coiled intestine affords a large surface area for absorption. The intestine joins the rectum at the posterior end. The blind cloaca branch off from the junction of the intestine and the rectum. The rectum leads to the cloaca, which receives and expels digestive and metabolic waste. So after the breaking down of food substances, the proteins, the lipids, and the carbohydrates in the duodenum, undigested, the food is then moved to the intestine where absorption takes place, and undigested foods are then moved to the cloaca and expelled. Want to look at respiratory system, the respiratory system of birds. Birds have one of the most complex respiratory systems of all animal groups. Upon inhalation, 75% of fresh air bypasses the lungs and flows directly into the posterior air sac, which extends from the lungs and connects to the air spaces and the bones. And connects to the air spaces and the bones. And these air spaces in the bones are called the pneumatic cavities. Okay? And the air also fills these pneumatic cavities. That's to say that some of the 70% of the air that comes in gets into the posterior air sac and also extends to the from the lungs and connect with the air spaces in the bones. So the respiratory system of the birds consists of the nostrils, the trachea, okay, the lungs, and also air sacs and pneumatic cavities that are part of the respiratory system. Now, the other 25% of the air goes directly into the lungs, okay? When the bird exhales, the used air flows out of the lung and the stored fresh air from the posterior air sac is simultaneously forced into the lungs. Thus, a bird's lungs receive a constant supply of fresh air during both inhalation and exhalation. Now, here is the respiratory system of a bird. Like I said earlier, the respiratory system of the bird consists of the nostrils. Oxygen is taken in through the nostrils. Now, when the air comes in, it bypasses the lungs and enters 75% of the air gets into the air sacs, the posterior air sacs. Okay. And then upon exhalation, that's when some of the air gets, and the one that comes in that bypasses the lungs enters the air sacs and the pneumatic cavities, the pneumatic cavities in the bones. And then upon exhalation, 25% of the air now returns back to the lungs. So during both inhalation and exhalation, there's constant supply of air, and that enables birds to fly actively. Now here is a description of the respiratory system of birds. This is explaining the inhalation. Air goes in, bypasses the lungs and gets into the posterior air sacs. And then upon exhalation, the air now goes into the lungs, into the anterior air sac. And carbon dioxide also goes out through the nostrils. Okay, so during inhalation, that's what occurs. The air goes in to the posterior air sac, to the lungs, and the anterior air sac. Now, this is what happens during exhalation. During exhalation, air is moved from the posterior air sacs into the lungs, and out. Carbon dioxide is voided out from the anterior air sac back to the nostrils. Now, the lungs have air tubes. The lungs of the birds have air tubes that's also very essential for respiration of the bird. Now I want to look at the circulatory system of the birds. Bird's heart has 4 chambers, like a mammalian heart. So the birds, well, there's 4-chambered hearts. And that's in contrast to, that's different from the reptiles that have 3-chambered hearts. We said earlier that the reptiles have 3-chambered hearts. Only the crocodilians have 4-chambered hearts. The mammals and the birds have 4-chambered hearts. That's one unique feature about the respiratory system of birds, the circulatory system of birds. In birds, the main arteries taking blood away from the heart originate from the right aortic arc or a pharyngeal arc, unlike in the mammals where the left aortic arc forms this part of the aorta. The postcaval vein receives blood from the limbs via the renal portal system. Unlike in mammals, the circulating red blood cells in birds retain their nucleus. One unique feature, the red blood cells of birds have nucleus, while the red blood cells of mammals lack nucleus. Now here's the heart of a bird. Okay, and these arrows are showing the movement of blood. Okay, this is the inferior vena cava, where deoxygenated blood comes in and passes from the right atrium to the right ventricle, and then into the pulmonary artery, and then the blood is then pumped to the lungs, where it receives oxygen from the lungs. Okay, after receiving oxygen, the blood returns back to the heart through and gets into the left atrium and pumped to the left ventricle and then into the rest of the body through the aorta. This is also showing the circulatory system of birds. The circulatory system of birds is divided into 3 parts, just as it is with mammals. It has the coronary circulation, which is the circulation of blood in the heart. Then it has the pulmonary circulation, the movement of blood to the lungs and back to the heart. And then the systemic circulation, the movement of blood from the heart to the rest of the body and back to the heart. Now, just as it is being described here, deoxygenated blood returns to the heart through the right atrium or the right auricle, and then it's pumped to the right ventricle, and then this deoxygenated blood is pumped to the lungs to receive oxygen, and then the oxygenated blood returns back to the heart through the left auricle or the left atrium, and then pumped to the left ventricle, and then it's pumped to the rest of the body. It enters the systemic circulation through the aorta, and is then sent to the area around the head. In fact, the cells of the body where oxidative metabolism takes place and the oxygen is used up. And carbon dioxide is now returned back to the heart, and deoxygenated blood returns to the heart through the right auricle, and the circulation continues. So we have the coronary circulation in the heart, then pulmonary circulation, okay, movement of blood to the lungs and back to the heart, and systemic circulation, the pumping of blood through the aorta to the rest of the body, the systems, and back. That's the systemic circulation. The circulatory system of birds is advanced over that of reptiles in several ways. One, there is a complete separation between the pulmonary circulation, that lungs, and systemic or body circulation as in the mammals. The left systemic arc or aortic artery is lost. Blood passing from the heart to the dorsal aorta via the right arc. 3. The post-caval vein is directly connected with the renal portal that connects the kidneys with the liver. Then 4. The portal circulation through the kidneys is greatly reduced. Birds' hearts are large, from 2.2 to over 2.4, 0.2 to over 2.4% of body weight, as opposed to the 0.24 to 0.79% in most mammals. Now, the nervous system of birds. The nervous system is large relative to the bird's size. The most developed part of the brain is the one that controls the flight-related functions, while the cerebellum coordinates movement, and while the cerebellum coordinates movement, and the cerebrum controls behavior patterns, navigation, mating, and nest building. Most birds have poor sense of smell, with notable exceptions including kiwis, New World vultures, and tubules. The avian visual system is usually highly developed. Water birds have special flexible lenses, allowing accommodation for vision in air and water. Now, here's the structure of the brain of the birds, okay, having the olfactory lobe, the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the pituitary, and the optic lobes. Thanks for watching. Now, the next lecture will be on classification of birds.